Sportageous. Sport gets smarter.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sportageous Videocast, where we bring you the most insightful, engaging, and in-depth conversations with sports professionals from all walks of life. My guest today is an absolutely fascinating person. Sue Strachan works as a kidney doctor by day, but as a sports aficionado, she has competed in numerous different sports: cricket, tennis, hockey, and recently she won the Scottish Masters over 55s in squash. Nowadays, though, she is the president-elect and preparing to become the first ever woman president of Scotland Cricket in the organization's 140-year history. Welcome to the show, Sue.
Thank you very much, Strachan.
I know that I've given a bit of an intro about what you do, but I wanted to keep it brief so that you could really essentially share your story. Let's start off with a little bit about your sporting career. You've been across the sporting world, having played all these different sports. This was a two-pronged question, essentially. How has that shaped you, and why or what sort of led you to play all these different sports?
Okay, as a teenager, I played lots of different sport. I played tennis to a reasonable sort of county level. I played hockey for my school and was the hockey captain at school. I wasn't allowed to play cricket, or I would have played cricket as well. I played badminton, I swam. And then I was introduced to squash as a 14-year-old. And although I continued all my other sports, squash became my main sport as a teenager. And I managed to get selected for the national squad as a 17-year-old for the under-19 squad. But I wanted to be a doctor. And so I left school to go to university age 17, and decided at that point that I had to decide whether I wanted to be a full-time squash player or whether I wanted to be a doctor. And I think I knew even then I perhaps didn't have quite the mindset to be a professional squash player. I like being part of a team. I like that team ethos. I like when everything's kept light and fun. And I played sport for fun mostly. And so I decided I would progress my career in medicine instead at the expense of my squash. And I played a little sport at university, but not very much. And then started working as a junior doctor and fell out of sport completely. There's no time, too tired, didn't know anyone, many reasons. And it wasn't until I really almost 40 that I put a squash racket back in my hand. Somebody suggested I come and have a hit with them. And I walked into the squash club. And any of you out there who are squash players will know the particular smell of a squash club. It's a mixture of wood and plaster and stale sweat, really, which sounds horrible. But to a squash player, I walked in and I thought, oh, I'm home. But I was terrible, truly terrible. And so it took me a couple of years, really, to get back into playing at a level that I was comfortable with. And then I was introduced to masters sport, which is 35 and over. And I found this whole new life and a whole new set of friends around the world that I've met through my squash. And I found that feeling of something I could become really good at, and I would enjoy, and was much more fun than going to the gym. I used to go to the gym, but really just because I knew I had to stay healthy. But I was back and I was playing games, which is what I like to do most. I was playing games, getting healthy. I lost some weight because I was exercising much more. I felt much better about myself. But most importantly, I was really having fun. And so my squash continued. I've played for the Scottish Masters team really since I was 40, and I'm now 56. And I have just met the most amazing bunch of people. We've had so much fun, and I just love it. And then after that, I then also got involved in cricket, because the cricket pitch in my club is in the same club as the squash courts. And I got involved in trying to set up the first women's cricket team in our club with myself, my daughter, some people that I knew from the hockey club. And we got started playing cricket. I used to listen to and watch cricket, but as a youngster, I was never allowed to play because I was a girl. Mm-hmm. And I found a love of being part of the team again through my cricket. And so I've progressed that. My daughter played for Scotland, got a couple of caps. I used to drive all the youngsters around. I was playing a bit, but I'm not a very good cricketer. I can hold a bat and I can score some runs, but I still haven't. I've decided to be a wicket keeper rather than a bowler because I can't learn to bowl aged 56. I just can't get it into my head. But it's great fun. And, it's the only sport you get cake halfway through. That's always going to be a good thing. So I got involved in the women's cricket that way, and I got back to hockey and got involved with that again. And I've now got these four sports really. I play a bit of tennis as well, that I just gained so much health and fun from. And then I progressed my cricket. They decided to have a board member for the first time ever to represent clubs that had girls and women's teams. And I was asked if I would represent all the clubs that had women's teams on the board. And I've been on the board for 4 years now. And then I was approached, somebody asked me whether I would consider, if elected, taking on the role of president. And, what a huge honor. I've always wanted to be the first woman to do something. So this is obviously my thing. And, huge honor, desperately keen to do it. I've had to sort of rejig some other things to give me the time to do it. And now I'm just champing at the bit, wanting to get going, really. And I'm sort of got going as president-elect. Started doing some work on the things that I think that we can progress while I'm president, hopefully, as part of Cricket Scotland.
Yeah, wow, that is absolutely fascinating. And how ironic is it that when you were younger, you weren't allowed to play the sport for being a woman, and now here you are, soon to be running the organization. And that is it's an absolutely phenomenal story. And I know that one of the key things, Sue, that you have spoken about, from what I've read and understood, is this idea of encouraging women and girls to embrace the benefits of sport. So tell me a little bit about why, for example, this inclusivity is important within sport. I mean, obviously, we've seen, for example, in the context of cricket, we've seen the very recent ICC Women's T20 World Cup. Here in Australia, actually, I had the pleasure of attending a few games, which was awesome. We've seen the growth potential. We've seen the sort of turnout that, the final almost broke the world record for the most attended women's sporting match. So why do you think this is important? And why is it one of these things that you hold so closely, perhaps alongside what, we've already talked about?
I think sport should be for everyone, no matter your gender, no matter your sex, no matter your color or your creed or your ability to pay. Sport should be for everyone. It is just that my love of sport is the love of the fun of it, as well as the feeling that it gives you. And I am a strong believer that sport should be for all, and that there are so many different sports in so many different forms that, given the chance to try things out, most children, and probably more adults than you would expect, will find something, some sport in some form, that they will get a huge amount of enjoyment from. And if it's fun, it makes you come back. And if you come back to sport, you get healthier, you feel better about yourself, you feel stronger. There's just nothing bad about sport. I would prescribe sport and exercise if I was allowed to do, because it's like a drug, but with no bad side effects. But it's really important that that should be for everyone, not just for a small proportion of society. And so it's really important that as a sports governing body, for example, or somebody involved in sport, that I try and find different ways of delivering that sport to different people, making it accessible to everyone, no matter who they are. And that's one of the good things about cricket. There are so many different forms of cricket. There are different lengths of games. There are different forms of junior cricket. So I think there's something for everyone in cricket. And I don't know if you've heard about Cricket, which is CRICHIIT, which is won the ICC Global Innovation Award. So I was part of the development of that, which was a high intensity interval training, which women find accessible and not alien, but it also manages to teach them some cricket moves at the same time and introduce them to being part of a sports club. So you get the social part of that as well, in a way which doesn't make people feel daunted or alien. So that's really important. All the programs that are done in inner cities, like the Wickets program, which we have in Glasgow and some of the inner city areas, helping children to learn the joys of sport, but also the life lessons you learn through sport, the team working, the decision making, the assessment of risk and benefit. All of these things are just so important in life, and they just make you more resilient to the ups and downs of life, and they give you that release when you need it, that you can, it's almost like a mindfulness. When I go and play squash and do routine drills, for example, other people say, oh, I get so bored doing routines. But my routines are a mindfulness activity, really. All I have to think about are set things in my sport. And I come out of that 45 minutes and it's passed like a flash. I'm sweaty, I'm puffed out, I go and have a shower, and I just feel so good. I feel well, I feel happy. And I feel that, I feel as invincible as I ever feel.
Yeah, wow.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely. And I cannot agree more. I think that, we just as many men and women play sport at the same level. So why, not promote that, and why not give women the ability and the opportunity to get more involved on the mainstream side of sport? So absolutely, that's there. And it's interesting because, you have squash on one hand, and you talked about the being in a squash court. So I was actually playing squash yesterday, so I can relate.
Oh, that's not fair. I can't get on the court at the moment because of lockdown. That's very unfair.
So
I've duct taped a squash court on my driveway instead, so I can at least practice the movement.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I've seen a bit of those around on social media. We've had the courts open for a bit, but I guess coming to what you sort of talked about, on the one hand, there's squash, which also arguably to an extent, like cricket, being an elite sport relative to some other games, it is, in spite of that, when we look at things like the Professional Squash Association and that sort of thing, it's quite egalitarian in terms of prize money.
Very much so.
In terms of giving coverage to men and women equally. In fact, I think the recent retirement of the world number one, Raneem Al-Walili, was
my heroine.
Yeah.
I'm so sad she's retired. She's such an amazing person, and the joy that you see on her face as she plays. But just, the most entertaining player to watch on the tour, male or female.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think, her retirement came as a huge shock to everyone, and all these accolades and thank yous and well wishes sort of followed that. And then on the other hand, Sue, there's cricket. And, you know, we look at cricket, and women's cricket is very, very young relative to men's cricket. I think that, you know, men's cricket has had a lot of other issues as well. When we talk about things like race and more sort of on that socio-cultural side of things. But when it comes to women's cricket, aside from, you know, maybe England, Australia, and perhaps India, women's cricket is still in a very, very fragile state. And, you know,
Absolutely.
the interesting part of it is we've seen these superstars turn up, like the Thailand women's cricket team, which was just lovely to see.
The nicest team in the world.
Yeah.
They're just a lovely, lovely bunch of girls.
Precisely. And we noticed this opportunity, obviously. What do you think, as, you know, now taking sort of running very shortly, you'll be in, I say this this way, but that's not like in command of Cricket Scotland.
I'll be part of the leadership group, certainly.
Yes, sure. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
When it comes to women's cricket in Scotland, tell me a little bit about that, and tell me what you sort of envision for, sure, the men's game, but also the women's game in particular. And I just wanted to hear a little bit about that from you.
Yeah, I think it's a terrible shame that women's cricket has had so little coverage. And as you say, I've been struck by the difference in my two main sports there. You know, squash with equal prize money, playing on the same terms as the men, and then cricket, the women having to struggle for coverage, for funding, for everything, really. We've had to fight for everything that they have got. And that makes me sad, and that's probably partly why I got involved in the leadership part of cricket. I also, as a sort of part-time volunteer job, manage the Scotland women's cricket team, the Wildcats, when they're away on tour, and I've done that for a couple of years. So I have a little more insight into the international game from their point of view. And it's mostly about money, you know, particularly in an associate nation. So the ICC have full members, as you know, who have better funding than the nations who are not quite full members. We're called associate members. So Scotland, as an associate member, has a lot less funding than the big nations, and you have to try and find a way to fund your women's program and your men's team, knowing that the funding that you receive from the ICC is probably going to depend much more on the results of your men's team than your women's team. Now, Thailand have a sort of flip side of that, where women's cricket is bigger than men's cricket in Thailand. And so they've been able to fund their women's team to be together for the last couple of years. And the Scotland team played Thailand 2 years before they qualified for the World Cup. And we just failed to qualify for the World Cup. And the difference in those 2 years, with that funding and with that determination to ensure that they performed at their very best at the time that they needed to, was the difference in performance was striking. And if we're going to be able to perform in a sort of world top 10 level, then somehow we have to find a way to fund our players to have at least part-time professional contracts, I think. You know, the Scotland women's team is a young team. Now, that's partly because as you get older, it is more and more difficult to take the time as a part-timer. So you have a career, you have a job, you maybe have family, you have other commitments. And if you're not paid to play cricket, then you have to prioritize your job, no matter how good you are. And so I would like to see us have enough funding that we can support our female athletes in the same way as we support our male athletes. I see no reason that it should be different. We have some amazingly talented young women playing cricket, and we have a performance pathway now that has been developed over the last few years that matches the male performance pathway for our female athletes in Scotland, certainly. And so the depth of our pool is getting bigger, but it is just a constant battle, and it's a constant financial strain trying to deliver that without much funding. And the media seem to want to cover men's cricket, whereas actually, half of the population is female. And the Women's World Cup in Australia was the prime example. If you put on a show, people will watch. And it was the most entertaining World Cup that I've seen. And I would say more entertaining than the Men's World Cup myself, but then I would say that, wouldn't I? But, to give media coverage to these big events allows then girls to see role models, to say, I want to be like Meg Lanning. I want to be like Elise Perry. Look at these amazing athletes. How healthy and happy do they look? Look at their fun. That's the other difference. When you watch these female professional teams as compared to the male teams, what a lot of fun they seem to have. And sport, it's not cool to be a sporty girl, so it has to be fun. That comes across when you see it covered. But if nobody sees it, then nobody finds out about it unless you happen to have a family member who is already involved. So really important to get that coverage, really important to get that funding so that we can show our sport on a world stage as it should be shown. And so we can support these young women to become professional cricketers and to be able to hone their skills and develop their skills so that they can be the best that they can possibly be. And at the same time, be role models to youngsters, have healthy role models rather than just people who are role models because of the way they look or because of what they buy and where they shop. It's much more healthy to our young people to have sporting role models who they could say, well, maybe one day I could be her. Maybe one day I could do that. And if we could just crack that, then women's sport, will just grow and grow. And that's one of the really worrying parts of this epidemic, of this global pandemic, is that we were getting there. And, that World Cup final in Australia was a huge event and was just such a showcase for women's sport. And then we're now back in the situation where many of the men's teams are being funded to restart because media rights are important to sports governing bodies. So they have to go with where they're going to get their funding. And again, women's sport seems to have just stepped back off the speed again. So, worrying times for us, potentially amazing times. Potentially we're almost there, but it seems like every time we almost get there, somebody puts another obstacle in our way. But there's a lot of us very, very determined to make sure that whatever obstacles are put in our way, we'll vault over them and land well and move on.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, you talk about that funding side of things, and a lot of people within the sport, and even particularly people working on the women's side of not just cricket, but other sports as well, talk about that funding piece and how the pandemic has sort of reset that, in the sense that the funding first goes to the men, and then it will sort of drip down or pass over to the women's side of the game. However, there's also been this other debate or discussion around how, since this is almost like a reset for sport as a whole, there are opportunities that, if things are sort of maneuvered through in the correct manner or in an appropriate manner, this may create new avenues for, in this case, women's cricket. Do you have any thoughts on that you may like to share?
I think, every situation which calls a halt to something allows you an opportunity to restart in the way that you would want to restart. I do think it's very difficult when most of the funding depends on the men's performance, because that then makes it really hard to then prioritize the women's side of the game. But I think that it is a perfect opportunity to say, why don't we do this slightly differently than we did it before? Why don't we perhaps, where we have these gaps in coverage because there's not so much going on, why don't we give some coverage to the women's game? Encourage that coverage and see what happens, and see if we can finally help people realize how entertaining women's cricket can be, as well as being something that gives young women and girls that role model behavior from our amazing professional athletes. It's also an entertaining game, and there's a lot of skill, and I think a lot of people don't realize that when you're a female athlete, I talk about it on a squash court, for example. For me to beat a guy at squash, I need to be a better player. So for these women to be at the level they're at, they often have better technical skills than the men because they can't disadvantaged to some extent. So the game is different. It's a different game. It's not women trying to play men's cricket. It's women playing the best cricket that you can play. And it's getting that across can be quite difficult. But we will continue to try and do that as much as we can. And we have the most amazing ambassadors in some of the top female athletes in cricket.
Sure. Absolutely. And it's interesting because so here in Australia, we're generally better when it comes to not just women's sports than a lot of, I wouldn't say better in the sense that we have better athletes, but we're better at promoting it. Our media coverage, I think that the standard global average of mainstream media coverage of women's sports stands at a meager 4%. And that is terrible. In Australia, it's at about 12, which is significantly higher, but still, yeah, it's still really poor. And in spite of that, we're seeing this growth. And I guess another thing that is starkly different in the cricketing world between where you are and where I am is that cricket is huge in Australia. Australia is, one of the big three cricketing countries in the ICC, whereas as you touched on earlier, Scotland comes under that associate nation set of teams. Tell me, this was a bit more of a general question, I guess. Tell me a little bit about what some of the challenges are in that regard, because obviously the viewership, the fan base of cricket in Scotland is significantly less than, let's say, Australia or even England, or of course places like India and Pakistan. So what are some of the challenges around that, and what do you think being on that leadership team will be some of the things that you need to work on to perhaps grow that sport, both from your end, but also perhaps with the support of the ICC?
Well, I think there are significant challenges. I think that there is a perception in some parts of Scotland that cricket is an English sport. And so some people discount the fact that you can play cricket in Scotland because it rains all the time. But then when you watch international cricket, it rains quite a lot in India. It rains quite a lot in other places too. So I think there are lots of misperceptions about cricket in Scotland, and we're trying to break down those barriers. But we need an opportunity to showcase the fact that cricket is a really good sport to play, and that you can play it in Scotland. So the opportunity to play international cricket is a huge trigger to that. And for example, we played, our men's team played England in a one-day international and beat England when they were world number one in ODIs. And that was huge for Cricket Scotland. We had a great crowd. We had, it was actually on the television. You know, that was amazing for Cricket Scotland, because people finally realised that you do play cricket in Scotland. There is the Scottish cricket team. So it's getting past the perception that football is a Scottish sport, whereas actually cricket has been around for a lot longer than football, and get past the perception that cricket is a posh sport. So I think there are lots of barriers to break down, and we're trying to do that gradually, but it takes time. And we need support to do that. So we need the media, the print media don't cover cricket in Scotland very much. We have one paper that covers it very well. So we need to take control of the social media. We need to gradually improve the amount of live streaming that is done. We would really like if the print and TV would pick it up a bit more often as well. And we need to just gradually break down those barriers, let people hear from our players and hear that they're just normal Scottish people, but who have incredible skills, rather than thinking that they're somebody different to you. So we have our players trying to be involved in as many things as they possibly can, so that people can see them and hear them. And at the same time, have all these programs that reach into communities, that reach into schools, to help children and their families learn that cricket is a good game to be involved in. So some of the younger programs that the ECB has developed, so that's the English and Wales Cricket Board, have developed and allowed us to tag on to, like All Stars Cricket and newly something called Dynamos Cricket. We've got lots of kids and families who've never been involved before have got involved with that. But we couldn't have afforded to have developed that on our own with our funding. And so the big nations, I think, have to help us in ways like the ECB have done there, and use their might and their size to help us smaller nations, just give us a leg up, but also give us opportunity for our international teams to play international cricket. You know, that was the difference with that Thailand team. They had been playing international cricket for 2 years. Our women's team, play international games in the World Cup qualifiers. And then they don't get any international cricket in between. So every game is a huge game, you know, and playing as an international team is different to playing as part of any other team. The stresses are different. You need to get used to that. So opportunities to play international cricket for our international teams, absolutely. We need more opportunity to do that. Coverage from our local media, we need more of that. And in the meantime, we will continue to work to try and reach out into communities that perhaps weren't sure what cricket really was about, and to teach them how much fun they can have being involved in our sport. So there's a whole big jigsaw puzzle there that we can do some of, but we need other people to support us in other places as well.
Absolutely. It sort of, it kind of reminds me of another associate nation being US cricket, and the fact that cricket's fastest growing market at the moment is America. And it's really interesting because the first ever international sports game was played in 1844 in the United States, in Manhattan, interestingly enough, between Canada and the US. And, you know, cricket's been non-existent in that country, and it's making a comeback. And similarly, you know, you talk about this support from the bigger nations, such as the England and Wales Cricket Board. We've seen that with the BCCI and the PCB initially working with Afghanistan cricket, and how they've taken the men's team. And So there are parallels there, and there are examples of that happening. And I mean, you know, Cricket Ireland's around the corner. They've become they've got, the men's team has test status now. So you know, it's there, and I really hope that you know, we see Cricket Scotland coming up there soon. The more teams there are in at the top of cricket, the better it is for the game. So
Yeah.
yeah, like
We're
absolutely.
hoping
Yeah.
one of our big aims as a sports governing body is to become the next full ICC member. And so we're working towards that, because that would unlock opportunity for us to make cricket mainstream in Scotland. So our underlying aim is to make cricket mainstream so that people will choose cricket. But in the background of that is that aim to become a full member, in order that that opportunity is unlocked for us to do the rest of the work that we really want to do. And at the same time, what we also need is sponsorship. So you need, and that's going to be particularly difficult now because of the global financial situation as a result of this pandemic, because you really need good sponsorship to fund teams to play internationally. You know, there aren't any top international teams who don't have sponsorship. And you know, I think, well, obviously I would say this, but I think that cricket is exactly the sort of thing that I would hope sponsors would look for if we can get that coverage a bit more mainstream, because it's all about health and well-being. It's all about equality. It's, you know, it is a sport that I think should be an attractive sport for sponsors, but we need the media to cover it for the sponsors to feel it's attractive. So it's all sort of, you feel sometimes like you're in a holding pattern, and we just need somebody to say, okay, you're next to land, and then we could put it all in place. But in the meantime, all we can do is control the things we can control. And that's trying to bring cricket to as many people as possible. Trying, you know, I talk about cricket as this fun sport, and people sometimes look at me and I say, well, you know, I'm not a great cricketer, but I have great fun playing. You know, it's a sport that you can, like I say, you can play a short form of the game in an evening. You know, Scotland has lovely long evenings in the summer. There's nothing better than going down, having a game of cricket, chatting to your mates, having a bit of cake, obviously, and then leaving to go home as dusk falls. You know, that is just such a great way to spend an evening. And if you can do that along with your kids, because they're playing as junior members and you're playing as a senior member, then that's even better.
Yeah, it's absolutely lovely. We of course get onto that not this time of the year, but in a few months when our summer comes around. But it is without a doubt a great way to spend a day, even if you're out with your mates and that sort of thing. I now sort of wanted to shift the conversation with my final question to you, to a little bit with what you do. A bit on the administrative side of cricket and sports in general, but also with what you do in your the other part of your life, and perhaps sort
my
of
proper job.
Yeah. So you know, you've touched on this, Sue, a few times throughout the conversation, the benefits of health and well-being because of sports. So the fact that, you know, you're active, you feel better, like you said earlier on, it's a drug in a way, and it's probably the healthiest drug around, playing sport, being able to not just compete with others, but compete with yourself, challenge yourself, have a bit of fun, enjoy yourself. But when you come to the administrative and professional side of things, obviously health and well-being has become of paramount importance within sport as of late. relative to, say, even 10 or 15 years ago, particularly on the physical side of things. You know, you have physiotherapists, you have doctors, you have all sorts of people in the staff and the medical staff who are assisting you. One of the newer, perhaps, concepts that have become more commonplace in the past few years have been having sports psychologists on board. Mental health within sports has been is a very relevant and contemporary discussion, I'd say. It's ever so more common in the media. We've in fact seen earlier this year and last year a few over here Australian cricketers come out and talk about, you know, the issues that they've dealt with in regards to their mental health and being in the sport. Do you think there is still a long way to go in this regard, based on, you know, the time that you've spent on the administrative side of things, and also being in health yourself? And do you believe that sport still needs to do more in doing this, or is enough being done already in regards to both physical but in particular mental health within sport for athletes and so on?
Yeah. I think we sometimes forget that athletes are human beings and have the same fragility that we all do, because they look so superhuman on the television, don't they? They look, you know, they're honed, they're muscular, they just look in the peak of health all the time. And so we forget that they're just as fragile mentally as the rest of us, and that they have different pressures on them than we do, but often more pressure, because they feel their existence is so fragile as well. You know, their funding depends on their performance. There's that feeling, you know, I could have a bad day at work, but I have a team around about me, and if I'm having a down day, I just have to do everything possibly a little bit more slowly to make sure that I dot every I and cross every T, and my patients are kept well and healthy. If I'm an athlete out there in the spotlight and I have a bad day, then people judge me for it. They judge me on social media. They judge me for selection for the next event. They judge me for my funding, my sponsorship. So there's a huge amount of pressure on them. And now that social media is all encompassing and that follows them not only in their events but also in their downtime, there are certain, you know, a specific set of pressures for these athletes. And so keeping them mentally strong is really important, and helping them to be mentally strong, and also allowing them not to be okay sometimes. You know, depression, anxiety, psychiatric illness, or psychological distress is just part of being a human being. And so, you know, we talk at work about we're not super beings. You know, we are human beings, and we have to remember our humanity and our fragility, and we have to allow athletes to be as human as we are. Although we want to put them up on that pedestal and aspire to be like them, we have to remember that they're fragile too, and that you know, that they will get ill. Much like they will get injured sometimes, they will get ill. And if they're injured, then that will have a huge knock-on effect on their psychological well-being and their mental well-being, because their body is their tool. And if your tool's broken, it's very difficult to stay strong and optimistic about what happens next. So the psychological part of this is so important for our athletes. And I don't think in the past it's been considered. I think it's got more difficult for athletes because they're more in the public eye now. And I think it's also more difficult because there's more money involved than there ever was in the past. So these are people with short careers who feel they have to maximize that short career because they don't know what will happen next. And so they have to be as well physically and mentally as they can be. And if you're not mentally well, your body will not perform properly. You know, it doesn't need a rocket scientist to tell you that. If you're feeling a bit low, then even if you're just going out for a run, you don't run quite as well and you don't feel quite as well. So psychological support is really important for the athletes, and giving them safe spaces when they're in distress, giving them access to support when they're well to maximize their performance, but also support that will notice when they're not well, and that will pick them up and give them the best treatment that they can get or the best support that they need. And if that means taking time out of performance, then so be it. And also they then need the media around them to manage that. So they need support if they are unwell. You know, depression is an illness. You don't need to have something bad happen to you to get depression. It just happens. Now, if your depression is going to be in the public eye, then it's really helpful if you've got good media support to manage that part as well, so that that takes the further distress off our athletes. So psychological support for maximizing performance is incredibly important, but also for just mental well-being and continuing to support people's mental well-being is incredibly important too. And I think we're in the infancy of that. And I think I can only see that growing and developing. And hopefully it will help our athletes not only be strong while they perform, but also be healthier in their lives during their sporting performance years, but also after. There are so many parts of this. I could go on for a whole day. Sorry.
No, I think those were some absolutely fascinating insights. And, you know, I personally hadn't really thought of it from that idea of them having this short career span where they feel the need, and that's completely understandable. And, you know, they feel the need to maximize essentially the output from that. And so that was a really sort of an eye-opener for me, because when you mentioned it, it made complete sense, of course. And with the rise of social media and being in the public eye, it's like they're almost always in the center of attention. So look, I think we'll end it there, Sue, but it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I thank you so much once again for coming on the show and sharing your insights with us here at Sportageous. And I wish you all the best as cricket is returning with Cricket Scotland, and I look forward to seeing the fruits that come out of that and how Cricket Scotland continues to grow. For everyone watching, I will say head on over to the social media for Cricket Scotland, give them a follow, stay tuned to what happens with cricket in Scotland when Sue takes over, or gets into the leadership team, as she said. Doesn't command it necessarily, but look, thank you once again, Sue. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
It's been a pleasure, Tarian.